So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We're going to talk about talent management today, and some of the focus with more of a focus on LHS plus populations. And I like to think about recruitment and some of these equity strategies really holistically and action oriented, because we often talk about what we should do and what our goals are, but we don't actually talk about how to get there. And so it's the same thing with bias or reshaping culture. We actually have to think about what are the components that go into those outcomes. So today I want to talk about talent management. Sorry if this is not advancing. There we go. Talk about talent management and define it. Think about ways that we can build in these principles holistically into our selection processes. How are we going to be using data to do that? And then we want to move to really an attract and thrive kind of culture. Sorry, my slides, I don't know why they're advancing without me. How can we do an attract and thrive culture rather than something that is sort of, just survive, right? Retention versus thriving. So this is an integrated set of processes and programs and cultural norms that are designed to attract, develop, and deploy and retain talent to achieve our strategic objectives. So in the instance of making sure that we are caring for LHS plus patients the way that we should, we likely want to attract the talent, skills, experiences, and abilities that will allow us to have that among our faculty and provider ranks. And so how can we center that in our processes in order to ensure that we actually achieve these outcomes? So we start with auditing and sort of getting a baseline of where we are. Most of us have that data about our faculty numbers, our fellow numbers, residents, and UME. We want to map those processes and understand each phase of those processes and what they look like, build some data infrastructure, and then look at structural equity within that process, and then increase capacity. I had a conversation this morning with a colleague who's beginning to work on some tools in the residency and fellowship recruitment space to think about how to curate that data differently. We were talking about the program director's workstation and how it really hasn't been retooled in a long time. It's very clunky. There are these filters, but it doesn't really visualize the data in meaningful ways. And we haven't really thought about selection and using sort of a stencil approach, right? If we overlay this and we look at who are the students who have excelled in leadership, who are the students that have excelled in research, who are the students that have excelled in service, where are my organizers and change agents within this institution? How can we get those filters rather than just looking at who's ranked XYZ in the class or who has a chair letter versus doesn't have a chair letter? What are some of the more meaningful metrics that we could employ? So when we audit the outcomes, we first want to look at, doing that self-examination. Who are we? Why do people apply to us? Why are they interested? Doing some focus groups and talking to, recruitment to get a sense of what do people think about your institution, right? What are the pre-med students? What's our image among pre-med students? What's our image among GME trainees and fellowship? And then faculty, like, are we a preferred destination? And if not, why not? In some sort of misadventures in LHS plus recruitment, one of the students that I was mentoring had gotten into some medical schools, and she was looking at a private school in the Midwest, and then a school in the California school, and then a school in the East Coast. And I said, well, what's going to differentiate you in trying to kind of determine a meaningful decision about where to go? And she said, well, I got a notice from Second Look for this school in the Midwest that was really trying to recruit me. And she said, and I'm not going to go there. And I said, why? And she said, well, the recruitment director specifically reached out to me and said that she hopes that I could go to Second Look because it's going to be really cool. And she thinks that I'll really enjoy the mariachi band. And they're going to have there was something else. And it was just very stereotypically delivered. And she's like, first of all, just because I'm LHS plus doesn't mean that I like mariachi. She's like, not all of us like mariachi. And it was just very oh, if we're going to try and recruit these minority students, we need to do something that's sort of culturally expressive, right? When what students are actually looking for is mentorship opportunities, career growth, what are the things that are meaningful to them? So here's a school that's really using a very surface-based approach to try and do this attraction model, but they're not thinking about what do our students need to thrive. If we think about the thriving part, we can put more things in place that actually attract the kind of talent that we want. We can put our mission and the alignment of that mission front and center. So when LHS Plus candidates look at our institution, they see themselves in our institution, not just in the people, but in the initiatives and in the priorities and in the strategic planning. They say, those are the same goals that I have. That's why I would want to train there as an undergraduate medical student or a resident or a fellow, or begin my career there as a faculty member. So the kinds of things we teach, where our graduates go, who's highlighted, right? Like who are the students that win awards, who's getting honors, like what kinds of ways do we even measure success within our institution that again helps people see themselves in that space. So once we look at, the diversity within our program, then we kind of want to think about what is our selection criteria for this and how did we get to these selection criteria? Did we sit down in a situation room and say, what do we want in a student or in a resident or in a faculty member in our department? We tend to fall into a status quo. We focus a lot on performance and not potential. And the challenge with focusing on only performance is that we choose people that we feel safe, that are proven entities, but we actually don't move the needle. And you've probably been in this situation before where you sort of have to be given an opportunity to get experience, but you have to have experience to be given an opportunity, right? So there's this instant loop based on historical exclusion of LH plus groups from leadership or from specific specialties that creates that opportunities gap. So one way to get around that is to focus on potential. What has this person done with the resources that they have? And what do we then assess their potential is for success? And if that potential plus alignment to our mission is there, we maybe should offer an opportunity to someone who brings potential and growth in that mission direction versus a proven entity that has less alignment or that may not be bringing some of the other strategic objectives in our recruitment strategy. So again, looking at faculty members, doing faculty searches, people are saying, well, we need this many publications or we need this many grants. Have they had an opportunity to write grants, right? Have they been able to actually, engage in that kind of training? So what is their potential to be able to do this? What communities are they connected to that might enable them to leverage some of those talents towards those strategic objectives? This is just a process map of one UME process. So just understanding from the verified AMCAS application submission all the way to who's in the class, right? So we really should have a detailed process map of our recruitment procedures. We cannot make targeted evidence-based interventions without understanding a process map. So this actually comes from a really boring class I took in graduate school eons ago that made us learn the Toyota production model. And one of the things about this model was that it was like the Toyota auto manufacturing, right? And they map every single element of the process so that they know if something breaks down, they can go exactly to the place in the process that isn't working and fix it, right? Well, on the very end of the assembly line, these mirrors are ending up crooked. So we know who's on the model, when the mirrors are installed, the process by which it's done, who's tempering the glue. Like we know every single piece about how that end result ended up that way. And mapping the process gives us an opportunity to engage some interventions that actually are sometimes simple. And sometimes changing the time that we offer interviews can make a difference. For example, first generation students that are LHS plus, who live within a certain radius, maybe a 4 to 6 hour radius of a school, are much more likely to drive to their interview than to fly because it's cheaper for them initially to drive, right? Especially if they're going with a friend and that kind of thing. So if we start our things in the morning, we're asking people to take 2 days because they have to drive the day before, be there for a couple of hours of interviewing, and then drive home. So would we be helping the students that would we help them be seen in our process if we said, we offer some interviews in the morning for people that want to sort of get in and get it out of the way, maybe local folks, but for people who are traveling, we're going to start at noon, or we're going to start at 1, or you can, we're going to do something to kind of understand who the people are that are coming. And it doesn't cost really anything to change the time. and increase inclusion in who ends up in the final pool based on these factors that knock people out that don't have anything to do with the filters that we want to use, right? So we want to make sure that our talent is not being whittled away by factors that are not related to the kinds of things that we're hoping to choose, parameters we're hoping to choose on. So this is an example of a simple map of the process. So maybe we have a candidate that's selected by the selection committee after they've looked at applications. They say, we're going to interview this person. And then the lists of all those people are given to Jen, and then Jen calls them all. They're scheduled. They confirm their emails, and then they interview. So this is an example of a very simple process map. But when we think about each detail, we have to break down at every single phase what actually goes into that. So what goes into scheduling the interviews? Well, in July, we look at faculty polling on availability, and we want to make sure that these specific faculty are available. So we just ask people when they're available. Well, what if the times that faculty members get scheduled to be on service that renders them unavailable to interview was changed so that more of our LHS Plus faculty members are actually available during interview season because their service obligations when they're on service at the hospital could be changed, right? So there's more that goes into scheduling than just, let's just ask who's available. If it's important for us to put faculty members that we think can relate to our candidates in front of those students or in front of those residents, then we have to think about the scheduling, especially because, one, it happens every year. We know when it's happening. We have all of these other parameters already mapped out for us. So it's not a mystery. A lot of these things are not mysteries, right? So think about your clinical schedule. Think about okay, wait a second, who do we want in the room and how can we think ahead on the scheduling piece? When we confirm the interview days and assign them to faculty, again, are we looking at the mix of faculty members that are showing up for interview day? Are we representing ourselves as inclusive for LHS Plus trainees based on who's there, right? And if not, how can we figure out how to change that? And again, the time of day might matter, the length of the day might matter, whether or not we offer some travel assistance, reaching out to students and saying, hey, we'll cover your parking. I remember being in downtown Northwestern. Our campus in Streeterville is a very, very high tourist kind of expensive area, right? There's Neiman Marcus nearby and it's by the lakefront. Parking is really expensive, $50-$60 a day in some of those garages. I paid $280 a month to park at Northwestern, subsidized as a member of the university. So paying for parking is a big deal, especially because we had a lot of underrepresented students driving and saying, okay, we'll give you some validations for your parking. Even the validations the hospital gave didn't cover the entire fee, right? It only covered a certain amount and made it $12 or something like that. So understanding the experiences of people who are accessing our processes is also really important, every single detail. Again, maybe Jen has given those interview dates and adds them to the schedule and the materials. We send out this basic, cadre of materials on interview day. We get those applications, we start interviewing. So here's a little bit of the details. So then in November, we're calling in for scheduling. The committee's doing alternate lists. Interviews continue, there's some cancellations, and then the interviews end, and we offer some encouragement to applicants, and then we're going to compile our rank list in February. So when we're thinking about every single detail, again, what does our faculty availability look like? And how can we make sure that the right people are in the room when we're scheduling that? Who are we assigning to who in terms of interviews, right? Are we making sure that if an applicant has an expressed interest in global health or infectious disease, that we are lining them up with someone that can mirror those interests and help them understand this is how you fit in with our institution? We have recruitment materials. What do those look like? Who's in them? Right? So students absolutely know if you've used a stock photo, right? There's such a thing as image search on Google. So they know if you've used a stock photo, and they say, they have a bunch of pictures on their website. Those aren't even their residents, right? Those aren't even their faculty members. Or that student in Northwestern, it was famously, that student graduated 6 years ago. They're still on the website, right? So what are we doing to represent our community in those recruitment materials? Can we include commitments to anti-racism? Can we include expectations around how LHS Plus trainees can get involved in supporting language learning and language competencies, even at the UME level, when they're coming to the institution? So again, are we putting our strengths and opportunities where people can see themselves thrive front and center? What does our interview day look like? Right? So who's there, who's messaging it? We recognized at Northwestern when I was doing GME recruitment there that a lot of our programs weren't very diverse and the interview groups themselves weren't very diverse. And so we tried to figure out when are programs interviewing, and can we choose some strategic times that where someone's in town, they can go to a resident meetup, right? Hosted in like a resident lounge, have a casual conversation. What is it like to be here? Someone who's going into OB can talk to someone in gen surg, can talk to someone in anesthesia, radiology. So they don't all have to be in the same specialty, we recognize, because the volume just wasn't there. But this helped us connect people to the individuals they needed to talk to be able to understand, is this institution going to be supportive for what my career goals are, right? So we were able to use and share resources between programs and say, okay, everyone's going to pitch in to cover the coffee and the cookie vouchers for the cafeteria or something so we can support these resident meetups. And we'll ask our resident diversity council to support this and coordinate it and make sure that people have opportunities to have those conversations. And then, once we're inviting candidates and giving those candidates in, what does that then look like, right? Like, so are we prioritizing that list for the person who's scheduling? So if someone doesn't call back, can we create priority among that list and say, look, here's our top, 40. We really want to interview these people. And when you call them, you need to tell them how much we want to interview them. And if they don't call you back, you're going to call them again, right? We're going to get specific about how we're going to manage the talent that's flowing to our institution so that Jen has clear marching orders, understands how we're integrating our priority of LHS Plus recruitment into this metric, not just and maybe it is, hey, all these people were equally invested in, call all of them back, right? But maybe we need to say that and say, can you express to these candidates how much the committee is interested in meeting them? What are their needs on interview day? Here's a template for the conversation we want you to have so we know what's being said when our people are being called. So calling the candidates and the interviews taking place. One of my programs at Northwestern actually went to an online scheduling for interviews and noticed that they had a higher cancellation rate that year. And they said, it was much more efficient because people would just go into the website and pick a spot and, drop out. But it was also a nameless, faceless, voiceless, not a very warm experience in scheduling. So they realized that their program coordinator was great at connecting with those candidates and answering their questions. Hey, maybe you can stay at like the courtyard, it's up the street, or if you stay here, then your parking is covered. Like little tips that she could offer them that made them really feel like this person is looking out for me and this is a program that really cares about my experience overall. And that was all kind of taken away, right? A website can't compete with a person live answering your questions about, will I have a Prius? Will I be able to charge it there somewhere? Like any of these interesting things about the locale can't really be curated through just FAQs on a website in the much more personal way. So again, do we have an alternate list, right? And what does that look like? And when we stop reviewing applications, do we need to read longer, right? Should we be looking deeper into the season or the pool for specific candidates with language speaking skills or LHS Plus identities or local ties or from our local institution? How are we filling our cancellations, right? Is it kind of haphazard? Faculty members can say, oh, put my friend's son on the cancellation list, or is there some sort of systematic way that we're making sure that these spots are filled? And then what does our follow-up email look like? Should the program director be sending it? Can the chief residents be sending it? What kind of messages are we sending to those follow-up candidates? And are we asking them about their experiences with us, either before, during, or after their experiences, so we have a chance to create some change and tailor that more specifically? So the data can tell us about process and trends and opportunities and losses. It doesn't really tell us about attitudes, right? It doesn't really tell us exactly what biases are showing up, but it can absolutely inform some of these aspects of what if we changed our interview weekend to the switch weekend for some of our schools that we know have higher populations of LH plus students in their student bodies, or that are graduating the most LHS plus students, to make sure that we're able to accommodate interviews for them, right? Or a lot of our students are coming from Florida, where there's a lot of LHS plus students, so maybe we need to do something to accommodate this time change, right? So there could be a lot of interesting things that come out of that process that give us information, opportunities, and losses. So what are some reasons why we don't get the outcomes we want? Whether it's a failed faculty search, it's a UME class that's seeded that really didn't meet our demographics goals, a program, residency program match where we're just kind of disappointed. And I think the number one reason in enrollment management practice is really market, not understanding your place within the market. So we think about each of these spots as spots within a market that can be filled, and each of the candidates as commodities on that market. There's a level of a competition across those market strata that are based on the niche that you might fill. So you might be really competitive for New Mexico residents, but not so much for residents from other places, right? There's a different yield or a different appeal or a different goal for why people come to our institution based on market. So as a UME admissions dean, I had to know, okay, how many spots do I need to give? If a person has this profile, if I make them an offer, they're likely to take it. If a person has this profile, I make them an offer, I'm probably one of 10 offers, right? So based on thinking about where that person is within the market as an individual commodity, but also where my school is, right? So if this person has an offer between my institution and another institution, where would I fall in that ratio? Would I go 50-50? Would I go, 20-80? Like most of the time they're going to choose me, most of the time they're not. So sometimes what we do is we don't pay attention to where we are within the market. We try to be somebody else, right? So I had programs at my very, unranked Catholic school saying, well, I want to be like Duke and I want to be like Harvard and I want to be like Hopkins. That's great. But the reality is you're not. And there's only so many students that are going to fill that market strata. So then there's that next middle third, right? So we have a lot of data from our holistic review practitioners that show us that the magic is in that middle third. The schools that recruit more students from that middle third of scores have much more diverse classes and the same outcomes, right? The same academic outcomes and completion outcomes and progress outcomes as schools that are recruiting from that top third. So it's important to, I think, recognize where do we need to be within this market? And if we're losing a ton of LHS plus representation because we want to be in that top third, are we gaining anything according to our mission alignment and what we've said, going back to that mission at the very beginning, what we said we're all about? Are we gaining what we should be gaining by saying this average is what's important to us, or this class rank is what's important to us, or these known schools with these pedigrees that we feel are fancy and shiny are more important to us than the outcomes at the end of the day of the patients that we're serving in New Mexico, right? LHS plus patients and language diverse patients that we're serving. So we have to make sure that we are dating the right candidates. And we can know this. The data can tell us whether or not we are punching above our weight class, right? So are we matching from among the top portions of our match list, or are we consistently matching below that? Right? Are people canceling interviews with us? Are we constantly saying, hey, do you want to interview? And people are like, no, you're a backup, right? If I'm in the area, then I'll swing by, but maybe not. Late in the season, I've already had 10 or 15 interviews. I'm not going to come to your school, right? So we want to be a top destination for the people that we're recruiting, and we want the best talent based on what we can yield for our institution. And that looks different for each school. So that's the beauty of thinking about it as a marketplace, is there's a lot of different niches and a lot of different institutional missions and needs that even programs within an institution might be looking for, right? So your internal medicine program might really be looking for physician scientists and have a big research arm. The family medicine physician might really be looking for community practitioners with strong public health backgrounds. There could be very different recruitment goals even within the same institution. The point is to understand what those are and to curate the talent that's going to help you meet those goals. So again, data helps identify some of those trends. They don't have opinions. Over time, they really help us apply resources more strategically. So the number one thing that I hear when it comes to LHS plus recruitment is the students aren't out there. They're not enough qualified applicants. The data tells us that that's not true. and you can also say, do I have an application problem? Like, are there qualified applicants out there and they're not applying to my program? Is different than there's no qualified applicants out there, right? Like these are two different solutions to that type of challenge. So we have to make sure that we understand, again, those relationships between process and outcome when the data comes back to us. So for residency recruitment, you can definitely go and look at the FACTS website. It gives you all sorts of information about UME and GME recruitment. It will give you reports, which universities and colleges graduate the most LHS plus applicants. It'll tell you by region, it tells you by state. So you can tailor your recruitment for specific groups or specific characteristics using this data and at least inform your recruitment approach, right? We get invited to so many things at the UME level. Do you want to come recruit here and recruit there? And understand, like, is that a high yield use of my resources? Where am I going to go to recruit for residency? I should be at LMSA because I know that there are LHS Plus graduates there that are interested in training, right? They're current medical students. I should go to SNMA. I should go to APAMSA. I should go to SAMSA. Like, are there organizations that you're more likely to find the kind of candidates that you're looking for? Is it, other types of meetings like Physicians for Human Rights or the American Medical Women's Association, or through specialty societies, student arms? Are there minority organizations within that, right? So looking into those options and making sure that you have a way of reaching the people that you're talking to. Just a couple quick data snapshots. I don't want to spend a lot of time on these because they're residency specific, but this is just an example of looking at your data over time and understanding what proportion of the national applicant pool you're receiving. So this program is getting 43% of the nationally available applicants who are MD graduates applying through ERS, right? So their number of applications are going up. But their gap between the number of nationally available underrepresented applicants to anesthesia and their program is under, right? So they're not hitting the watermark. They're getting a lower proportion of underrepresented candidates applying to their program. So we have kind of nationwide and then the program. And then we're looking at their interview to application ratio. So they're getting fewer applications available. Now they're interviewing fewer underrepresented candidates than overall of the applications that they are receiving. So this is already starting to tell us a story about where we might be able to apply some interventions, right? We need to get our URM applications up. We need to interview more of the pool that we're getting. Here's the cancellation rate. So now we have a higher cancellation rate from among underrepresented candidates than from among general candidates. That's also not good. So the ones we're asking are now canceling at a higher rate. So you can see that the picture, before we even show the match data, is probably not going to portend to goals and success in this area because we have these process gaps along the way where we're losing candidates and we're losing talent. We're not maybe calibrated, maybe we're not asking the right people. We need to follow up with these folks and ask why they're canceling, right? Like what is happening that about 1 in 4 of the general folks are canceling? That's still problematic. We had some programs at this institution with 0 cancellations, right? Like, so if you got an interview, you went. That was very different than programs that had these higher cancellation rates. And it was one of the tools we helped program directors use to understand, are you dating the right people? Are you market calibrated for the kind of talent that you can get? The goal with talent management is for you to choose the talent, not to latently let whoever's left come to your program, right? You want to craft your program. You want to say, what kind of environment do I want? What the kind of mix of people do I want? If I want LHS Plus candidates, or I want Spanish speakers, or I want students who understand immigrant health, or whatever it is that those qualities or characteristics are, you want to be in the driver's seat to get that talent in front of you at the end of the day. You don't want to end up with whatever falls out of the process through the filters and just get a class by default. That's not the goal. The goal of talent management is to pick it. So with residency, the stakes are relatively high because if you do this wrong and you are miscalibrated, you'll match the bottom of your list, which some people are totally happy with depending on what specialty they're in, or you're soaping. And then you're missing out on maybe being able to match someone that you wanted and they wanted to come to you versus who you're potentially going to end up with. Now, there's lots of reasons why folks soap, but it is a very time-limited process to try and find talent of what's left after an initial process. So we want to try and calibrate ourselves and get it right on the first try. So again, here's the match information. And I noticed also through this data that most programs rank everyone they interview. So the stakes for offering an interview then become really high, right? Faculty consider an interview a promise of some sort. Changing that frame actually helped us increase diversity in our program. Understanding that an interview is an opportunity to explore candidacy. It's not a promise of being ranked. You're not obligated to rank everyone you interview. So we just ask people, choose 10% of your pool of people and broaden your pool. Pick someone from a new medical school that you never would have interviewed because you have all these biases around new medical schools. Pick someone from a Puerto Rican school, a school in Puerto Rico that you haven't considered before, right? Broaden your horizons in the interview process so that you continue to be an option through these networks of students that are going to talk about where their opportunities are, where they should be applying. So we really want to understand, again, is this an applicant pool issue? Is it a reputation or perception issue? Is it a screening issue? Interview declines, a scheduling attrition? Is there something wrong with our scheduling process? Maybe people really want to come, but they just can't make it work. Or is it a rank or offer issue, right? Are our faculty packages where they need to be? Are our salaries for faculty competitive? Like who are people also looking at when they're in job searches with us? And search firms can also help us kind of understand some of that market calibration. But again, if it's an applicant pool issue, a reputation perception, we want to build relationships with target organizations, right? Like LMSA and SNMA, some of the specialty societies, National Medical Association. We can use lists from past or present institutions that are interested, right? So maybe we even say when we're trying to recruit for faculty, we appeal to our alums who trained at our medical school, or we ask, can we purchase an ad in an alumni magazine at any of the Four Corners medical schools? We understand that there's a regionality to people being interested in faculty. We target these approaches to enhance our applicant pool, not randomly by just putting an ad in some random journal or on Indeed or whatever, but we actually say, oh, maybe we buy an ad in University of Utah's alumni magazine because we look at these overlapping pedigrees of people who want to be in the Mountain West, right? Or who want to be in this Four Corners region. We do Arizona, we do Utah, we do Colorado. We try and use a regional approach to recruiting faculty to be coming to New Mexico. So there's all sorts of strategies for curating these challenges. Maybe we invite candidates to open houses or career development sessions. We offer career development and faculty development, even if you're not part of us. So you have a chance to come in and try on, what does it feel like? You can intermix and mingle with our LHS Plus faculty at this institution, hear about the programs that we have. It's kind of a very loose thing. Be on a talent registry that we have, so when opportunities come up, you'll be in the know and already have some pre-exploration of that opportunity coming forward. We know that we have openings and we do hirings every year, but yet we act like every search is a brand new thing, right? So what about pre-search receptions or events where we showcase what's going on in research in our minority communities? What are we doing in public health? What are we doing in global health? And then again, targeting outreach to specific populations. Maybe we run ads in GLAMA. We run ads in these other organizations where we're trying to increase representation from across specific groups. And then doing a survey or a focus group, right? Maybe you're going to look at a group of graduating fellows and you sit them down and you say, what are you going to be looking for in your next position? What do you need? What are the kinds of things? And you know what? Weird things come out. You're like, I had no idea that childcare was that important. That came up as an important thing. And so we started working with our on-site childcare to increase the number of spots that residents and fellows could get. Because it turns out that's the phase, particularly in some of those longer fellowships where people are thinking about schools and childcare and things like that. Now, Northwestern is downtown. It's in Chicago. The schools in the city aren't great. But if people have kids, kindergarten and under, that on-site childcare is really great, right? So what are even some of the things that, people are saying, I just want to do my research somewhere? What are the levers, strategic levers that your institution has already that can be maybe marketed differently to that population? So talk to your senior residents and your graduating fellows about what would it take for you to join the faculty? What kinds of experiences did you utilize or do you need moving forward to have this as your career? And same with fourth-year medical students or third-year medical students, right? Talking to them about their experiences can help us understand what we look like through our target population's eyes. Hearing from that student who was invited to the mariachi band for second look, it's like, I wonder if that school ever got that feedback, right? That maybe this isn't the most welcoming, grounded approach to attracting the talent that you're hoping to get, because that student knows that med school is not a mariachi concert, right? That student knows that it's about mentoring, that it's about academic support, that it's about career opportunities. That's what she's looking for in a school. And the school is putting on a party, right? To say, come to our medical school, right? So there's a mismatch in that approach. And then talking to people who didn't choose us, right? So this is a really great one. A lot of program directors, if you rank someone in the NRMP and they don't match with you, there's a window of time where you can actually figure out where your people went, right? And so that was always a big deal of working with program directors, of saying, who am I competing with, right? And program directors would say, you know what, if I'm losing people to Duke or Hopkins, like, I'm okay with it. I feel like I'm calibrated. I'm still getting my good mix. Like, they look at their list and they're like, if I'm losing people to this school or that school, then I'm not okay with it. I must have done something wrong. I'm calling that resident, because especially if they're in your specialty, you're using this to build a network, right? Maybe they'll come back for fellowship. Maybe they'll come back for faculty. So you're looking at this not just as a one-off of recruitment for that moment, but how to build more relationships, do that relational equity work that helps get the talent that you want for your institution. We also have to think about setting people up for success. And our institutions have a history of exclusion and a history of mistreatment and racism and white supremacy. So we really want to make sure that we build inclusive excellence and equity practice as part of how people show up, right? So very often our environments are not supportive. We recruit talent, they come in, they don't do very well, and then racism shows up again and tells us, well, they just didn't have what it took in the first place, right? And so it's really looking at that environment and making sure that we're explicit about that equity practice. We won't do this exercise, but this is just to understand. My colleague Erin Reeves does this description where, you know, when I say the word airplane to you, you picture something in your brain. That concept does not exist without a meaning making in your brain already, just what that means, right? And so there might be feelings that come up with it. Like, you might think about nervousness. You might think about your favorite airline that you fly. You might think about a big plane or a small plane, depending on your experiences with that word. And it's the same when I say police officer. It's the same when I say, juvenile delinquent, right? Like, you get a visual in your brain, and that's kind of how our bias works. So we look for things that we think that we already know. And so Erin gives this scenario where you follow this group, and she doesn't provide any details, right? She doesn't provide any of like the time of day or the car or anything. And then she asks you, visualize, what did you actually see, right? And people fill in all kinds of details that actually weren't there. So this is kind of how bias shows up within our institutions and in our daily practices of teaching and searching, is that we have these preconceived notions in our mind because of the way that our brain works. So our own culture and our own upbringings lead to these blind spots, and we don't see them because our vantage point is our own. The trick is to understand that we're looking through a lens so that we can then ask other people, what is your lens on that? Help me see it the way that you're seeing it. So diversity and inclusion only makes us smarter if we are then able to have a culture of equity practice where we can learn from those different perspectives. If we have all of the same hierarchy and all of the same tyranny going on, it doesn't matter who's in the room. We're not going to get those benefits of diversity and inclusion. So again, if we were in a classroom, I would give this to you on a piece of paper and I would have you sit around the symbol, right? So this is a bird's eye view of what we would be doing. And I would ask you to discuss what you're seeing with your colleagues that are across from you and around the table with you. And you would all be seeing different things. Some of you would be seeing an E, some of you would be seeing an M, some of you would be seeing a W, some of you would be seeing a 3. Some people would say it's a sigma. It's a McDonald's arch, I'm hungry. It's a Washington Nationals logo, right? Like, people start to sort of branch off even outside of alphanumeric things to logos and symbols. Every person's view is correct. Every person's view is accurate. It's not the same as the person across from them, but many of our arguments and our misses in equity practice is not understanding that this person is seeing a W and they're correct, and I'm seeing a 3 and I am also correct. So what do we do with those multiple lenses of the same experience? How does equity move forward when those experiences are all accurate but not the same? And even within identities, right? I've worked with LHS Plus students for 20 years. They're not a monolith. And so the challenges in meeting those needs, some students are low income, some students are not. Some students are native Spanish speakers, some students are not. Some students have immigrant histories that are recent, some students are not. Some students are mixed status or undocumented families. So we have to make sure that we're not using a template, that we're doing that important relational work of understanding the lens of the person that we're serving in order to be able to move forward. So I like to just talk about the power of allies in achieving equity and liberation. And most of the time, people do the equality equity. And I like to take this further, with liberation, which is just removing those structural barriers, right? So the way that LHS Plus folks were engineered out of medicine through the structures of the early development after the Flexner report was intentional. Those were structures that created criteria from the folks in power that created intentional exclusion. So if we're going to re-engineer that and get to liberation, we have to address those same structures. And part of that is looking at the kinds of things that we're building in as having value in what's necessary in our recruitment processes. Many of you have probably seen the holistic practice for structural equity, looking at experiences, attributes, and metrics, and understanding their interrelationships with each other. Students who are under quite a bit of stress. I was talking with one of our undergraduate partners last week. They were saying that they've got students who have caregiving duties, right? And they don't see themselves as being able to go to medical school outside of inland Southern California. But if they could realistically believe that that was an achievable goal and they could stay at home, maybe their horizon would change, right? So part of the orientation of collectivist cultures, which many LHS Plus or underrepresented or first-gen students come from, is thinking about how those experiences and attributes impact those metrics and the goal setting in the first place. For holistic practice, again, we want to be clear about what our mission anchors are, the things that we're going to value. We want to look for specific evidence of those things, right? So what is a letter of recommendation or a letter of evaluation evidence of, right? So what kinds of things are important from that? Are we looking for an endorsement? Are we looking for them to have all sorts of bells and whistles as far as the institution that they come from? And we want to basically understand what we're using, why we're using it, and then plan for the course corrections and bias that show up. So again, if we had these sort of mission anchors as part of our institution, and everybody has some sort of, trifecta of research, patient care, education, but maybe we have these things that are important. Where in the application are we going to find evidence of performance and potential for these three things? So what are the goals that are related to this, right? Like, what are the department goals? Who are we trying to produce? Are we trying to produce academic medicine docs? Are we trying to produce good teachers? Are we trying to produce good researchers? What are the things that we're interested in as far as our department or our class or cohort or our fellowship? One thing that you can do today to improve your selection process for LHS Plus candidates is to stop using the word fit. It is a catch-all for all sorts of fun biases that we often don't want to acknowledge. So just saying, not allowing the word fit in this discussion. So if you want to say that someone's not a good fit, you need to actually explain what that means. Tell me what you mean by that, right? Has a name I can't pronounce or don't recognize. I'd never get a beer with them. They don't look like me. They don't talk like me. I don't recognize the school they're from. I'm intimidated because I don't understand their experiences. They've been through so many hardships. I don't think they're going to relate, right? So let's work right now, make a commitment to stop using the word fit and get more specific about what we mean when we say that a person is not a good fit or is a good fit. So if we don't define it, we're not going to know what it looks like. So we keep it really amorphous, and then we exclude people by saying they're not a good fit, but we never really actually said what we were looking for, and we don't have to justify it. We throw out the fit word, and it's like, oh, that's it. They're not a good fit. It's dead on the vine, right? But we don't actually break it down. So we really want to make sure if we're trying to hit some goals, we have to figure out what those are. So what are the evidence factors in applications and CVs that allow us to assess a person's clinical experience, right? Maybe we're looking for in clinical experience on the application, we're looking for communication skills. We're looking for work ethic. We're looking for demonstration of responsibility. We're looking for curiosity. Maybe in their co-curricular experiences, we're interested in understanding their capacity for leadership or for achievement, right? Some of these are going to be overlapping as well. Research, what are we thinking about in terms of research? We want to know if they're engaged in they're curious, responsible, hardworking. Also mapping those to competencies. What competencies do we want our faculty or students, residents or fellows to meet at the end of this journey? And how can we look for indications of being able to meet, again, performance and potential toward those competencies on the application, right? So our competencies are patient care, medical knowledge, maybe professionalism. So what in their clinical practice experience gives us demonstrated evidence of their ability to meet these competencies. Again, community service, that might have competency implications for patient care, or professionalism, or for systems practice, right? Structural competency practice, cultural humility, anti-racism. Some of these things don't really map to much, but we tend to use them a lot. So we might say we really care about their background. They have a really good background, which is another way of saying they come from shiny, intimidating institutions that we think are fancy, that we somehow think are better than ours. But what does that really mean, right? The school information, letters. Well, they have a letter from their chair. Well, if the specialty requires a letter from the chair to apply, is a letter from a chair meaningful? Or is that a measure of how much an institution endorses certain students and doesn't endorse others? Is that a measure of putting a specialty gatekeeper in place? And do we endorse that practice or not? Is it evidence-based? Has anybody ever said students with chair letters are better candidates than students without? I don't know. I would need to look at the evidence and do a literature search to find out, what is this practice of chair letters really rooted in? It seems like it's rooted in some old hierarchy and endorsement and good old boys network type stuff that maybe isn't necessarily as meaningful as we want it to be for looking at potential and performance within our specialty or faculty. So again, when we think about talent management, we want to think about skill and potential. We want to think about passion and commitment, capacity for teamwork, inclusivity. What do we need and who do we need in the room? And how are we going to enact our values, right? We're not going to be protectionist about our reputation. We're not going to use a zero risk bias and pretend like every decision we make is going to be perfect, but we're going to let our values and our mission alignment guide the choices that we're making. It's important to keep in mind that everything is subjective. Even the things that we feel like are not very subjective are subjective, right? Even your blood pressure, right? Like some people get the white coat syndrome. Their blood pressure is normal. They go in, the subjectivity of being in the medical environment kind of freaks them out and their blood pressure gets a little elevated when they're there. It doesn't mean that they're not healthy. It just means that there's a context that enabled them to show up a little bit differently. So when we think about standardized exams, understand some medical students have literally thousands of dollars at their disposal for coaching, tutoring, and test prep that other medical students don't have, right? So if you're a medical student and you're on only the loan package, your ability to engage those standardized exams based on your past experiences with education is different than someone else. So we tend to ascribe those individual differences solely to individuals, right? We pretend like all things are equal among medical students, and we treat those board scores or those clerkship grades or those shelf exam scores as if all things are equal. The reality is all things are not equal. Some of our students are caregivers. Some of them have long-term illnesses. Some of them come from backgrounds where they've had a lot of catch-up work to do because they've been recipients of the structural injustices of poverty, housing insecurity, employment insecurity, all of those things. So we have to keep those things in mind and recognize that we're looking through that lens of that, what have they done with what they have? Right? And that's the key question to be asking when we're looking at someone for a faculty appointment. Have they taken themselves as far as they possibly could, given the opportunities that they've had thus far? So some of the structural components, we want to make sure that we're looking at a holistic paradigm. We're building teams. We're not just cutting people based on academic performance or some sort of easy metric, and then looking at experiences and then looking at background, right? Among the tiny group of people. We want to look at all of these things at the same time so that we can get as many views of the potential for mission alignment as possible. We want to work in teams. Again, we use mission factors to reduce our pool. We focus on performance and potential, and we're building a championship team. We're not just looking for a bunch of individual institutional rock stars. Again, here's just an example of a visual of 4 different candidates that might have different emphases in these different areas. Their ability to support each other, inspire each other, shape each other is going to be that much higher in an inclusive and equitable environment if they each have these different strengths, right? They don't all have to be amazing at academic skill and then have this sort of hierarchy of qualities and characteristics. There can be a lot of variety there. So I think I'm going to stop there because I know we're almost close to time and I'm not sure if there were any questions. Dr. Valdez?
Does anyone have questions in particular they would like to ask Dr. Nakai? I had one, brief one. What role do you think mentorship plays in development of faculty, recruitment of faculty, and how strong of a program? How do you get a good mentorship program going?
I think the mentoring piece is an important nut to crack. And I think it's good, again, to get specific about what do we need. So do we need coaching? Do we need instruction? We put a lot of things on mentoring, right? So if a person doesn't know how to write grants and has never written one, we probably need to coach them and skill them up for that specific thing to be successful in what their faculty goals are, not just sort of give them a mentor or person to connect with, right? So the more specific we can be about coaching and mentoring and skill building, the better. And we can do group a lot of things in small groups. All call. Who wants to learn about grant writing? We have a couple of senior faculty members that are great experienced grant writers. Here's social science and public health and nonprofit sector. Here's NIH. Go to these small group coaching sessions and learn the nuts and bolts of how to do that. Then we've given someone what they need to continue on their journey with, and given them an opportunity to identify what are the gaps that I have, versus coaching, which is, will you read my personal statement, right? Will you look at my my teaching statement? How do I even do that, right? Some of those one-to-one opportunities are doing something for the first time or being the first and only. That looks very different sometimes than larger kind of skill building. And then there's the sponsoring part, right? Who is going to sort of hold the door open for you and say, I'm endorsing this person. I'll write a letter for you. I'll be a reference for you. I'll speak up for you in meetings when XYZ happens and your initiatives get run over. So it looks very differently, but I think we have to break down mentoring. What is underneath that we actually think that people need to further their careers, and get specific about offering those services.
Thank you. There's a comment in the chat section from Dr. Rendon. He says, thanks, I'm going to stop using fit, or at a minimum, explain what I mean. And Dr. VMR stated, yes, the idea of fit is so troublesome, often pegs people into choosing a particular specialty to begin with, and it may be completely wrong.
Absolutely.
Do we have any other questions? Dr. Sanchez, any comments or questions you'd like to add? Dr. Sanchez? He's not hearing. Well, thank you very much. That was wonderful, enlightening, and I'm glad we recorded it. There's so much information that we'll be able to access again later. Thank you for your time, Dr. Nakai, and I see a lot of comments. Excellent presentations. So,
well, happy Hispanic Heritage Month, and keep doing the great work that you're doing at New Mexico. And I look forward to visiting again and hearing about the progress and offering support for your processes and your work. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.